Thank you. I'm delighted to welcome you, Minister, the first Minister for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, to attend a Congress of TUI. And like you, Minister, we are optimistic about the establishment of your new department. We hope it will be a success. We hope you will be a successful minister, indeed. If your department is successful, we think that will mean it's on the basis of our colleges, our IoTs, our TUs, our centres, our youth reach, our VTOS, all of the various elements that make up the enormous contribution that TUI makes to further and higher education, that these will also be successful. And we want to join with you in that to the best extent that we can. We see the potential value of two education voices being raised at Cabinet. One thing we will say, for all our optimism, you refer to us as robust. Well, as long-standing trade unionists whose robustness can make us downright awkward at times, we will observe closely, we will keep an eye on the rate of progress. We will welcome what is to be welcomed and that which is in keeping with our policies. But we will argue and we will oppose, and at times we will criticise. And in truth, Minister, I think you've already seen both sides of us. And in truth, it is not really two sides. It is the one side, because in both elements, we are fighting for what we believe in terms of good educational practice, good educational service, and what is required by our students. We acknowledge the thanks and the appreciation that you've expressed here for the enormously hard work that our members have put in response to the crisis. One thing we will say, this is part of the challenge that you face. Our members faced such hard work to an extent because they are carrying such a burden of decades of underinvestment. And that's a huge gap in the legacy that's before us all, that it now falls to you to take leadership in trying to address. And clearly we will be pushing you extremely hard in that direction. There were extraordinary efforts by our members in what you rightly said was a very abrupt switch to emergency remote teaching. There are some points that should be made in addition to that additional workload that was taken on. There were already enormous workloads. There were already huge problems faced by members long before COVID arrived. Some of this, Minister, and you may be able to help with this, some of this is purely bureaucratic. Some of it is a distraction, quite frankly, from the key elements of teaching and learning. And either measures need to be taken to reduce that burden, or else to hire the extra staff, bring forward the extra posts, do what needs to be done in order to relieve that burden from those who want to be as effective as they can in their classrooms and in their labs. It's also worth saying that in responding to the crisis and working from home, the supports provided to those working at home simply were not adequate. And that goes both to what employers made available by way of materials and equipment and so forth, but also the significant costs incurred by staff, the enormous increase in utility bills and so forth. There simply was not enough put in place in order to address that. In a debate that's taken place not very long ago, another workload issue, and one we're familiar with in TUI, was brought forward, which is to do with semesterization in further education and a perception of a real danger of it being railroaded into force. We know in third level the additional burdens that come with semesterization. We had it, even though it was supposed to have been brought in a collegiate way from academic processes and forums that would be very inclusive. We did feel it was railroaded through on us, and it did massively increase our workload. So that's an important point that we do want you to make note of. And another one is this. The newly adopted practices that we took on in response to the pandemic, they are on a strictly no precedent basis. We will not permit any slippage or any complacent assumptions to be made on this point. We will insist on being consulted on all proposals affecting our work, including new practices. And while we've borne an incredible burden, I think, in terms of what needed to be done for this crisis. But we certainly do not want that to be taken advantage of as the crisis ends. And I certainly hope that you will agree with me in that, and certainly your comments and the tone of your address made me believe so. It is worth saying that many of your key points resonate with ours. Indeed, if there was to be an overarching theme which I intended in my remarks to you, it was to be inclusion, removal of disadvantage, if you like, parity of esteem across education. In which regard, you have highlighted much that is dear to TUI. Our beginnings were in the vocational education sector, and we have long championed adult education, further education, youth reach, apprenticeship, and widening of access to third level. We have no time for elitism or for exclusion in TUI. And indeed, I'm proud to say that our Congress agenda every year is a testament to those values and those priorities. Members watching us on Zoom today have indeed dedicated their lives to helping and supporting students in all of the programs that you've mentioned. You speak of a single integrated tertiary system, and this would be valued by us, particularly if it really does give the correct value, the value that should always have been there for apprenticeship, for further education, and all of the other options which are traditionally overlooked or undervalued in the national discourse. In an earlier address to Congress, I decried the obsession with CAO points. And indeed, I would welcome a reform that takes some of that pressure away from students and which also highlights for them their other options. I've also, in my own work, seen the value of other routes into education in the sense of being in classrooms in what was the Institute of Technology, Tallaght, and is now TU Dublin, but seeing students come in to third level, having first availed of the opportunities in further education, and the extent to which they thrived, and not only thrived, but the extent to which their experience, their very positive experience, actually blossomed in the classroom and helped all of the students around them as well. So we certainly stand ready to support what can be done to widen access, to give proper value to other avenues, and to help students who need that help, as we in TUI have always done. And we believe that few organisations are better placed with regard to driving forward that agenda in terms of just the depth and breadth of our experience and the expertise of our practitioners on the ground. We're pleased, I think, in the emphasis you placed on consultation with us. And that is, as ever, the key in terms of dealing with TUI. When properly engaged, we are not found wanting. But if the engagement does not happen, then needless problems arise, which we certainly do not want to see. We are pleased to hear your focus on funding, your recognition of the current shortfalls, and your determination to make progress. We look forward to working over the coming year, and indeed we'll expect detailed reports at next year's Congress with regard to the progress you've made, and that's one of the things we'll be keeping a close eye on. And God willing, it will be a physical Congress, we'll be able to gather. But given our experience over many years, you will forgive us for waiting to see how you get on before we pass judgment on that matter. We know there are huge challenges that you face, and that's because we've faced them for many years, these exact funding challenges that have so hampered what we have wanted to do. And I'm going to make the very obvious point that just very significant investment is required in order to make up for what has been missed. You touched on the 168 million euro of additional funding that was provided with regard to COVID, and this takes me back to the an earlier point. While happy that that was provided, that was one element on which we did not get the consultation we would like to see. And we had put forward very sincerely in the early part of last summer what we saw as a vital element in what needed to be done, certainly in third level with regard to the COVID response, and that was additional staffing, because we could see the huge additional workload burdens that would come down at the tracks. And that did not land favourably with government, and I genuinely think that was a mistake. And I think that the lack of consultation with regard to the additional funding, and even to this day, the lack of clarity for us as to where that funding went, remains a difficulty. We are also, of course, hugely supportive of what you said with regard to additional funding and adult education, and the focus that you gave this in your address. We are only too familiar with the value of supporting adults in literacy, in numeracy, in digital skills, and the enormous boost to confidence that can result. And you're right, the knock-on effect into their families, into their communities, and for their entire lives. It is worth saying, though, that my earlier point about parity of esteem, it does extend beyond the student or the sector or the route into higher education and the world of work. It extends to staff also. And to be properly valued, I think staff have every right to expect proper terms and conditions and an incremental scale. And our adult literacy tutors are waiting more than a year now after the Labour Court recommendation for an offer that will help to address outstanding issues for them. And we look forward to hearing from you, and we would hope, given the emphasis you've placed on this in what you've presented to us, that there will be a generous offer, and that their enormous contribution will receive the value that it deserves. You've mentioned technological universities. Again, I'll mention funding. And another thing, of course, with regard to that is the position of IADT and of DKIT. We do not want to see, and we've had at times we've had to take some actions and pass branch motions in order to highlight our belief that the established, the agreed framework is how the sector should move forward. And we do not want to see, shall we say, madcap schemes outside what has been put forward and what has been properly through the processes of consultation and agreement. We do not want to see those derailing what should be a move forward by the whole sector in the same direction. I want to pay tribute, of course, to the TUI teams who are busily negotiating on the ground, and you've made reference to the progress that has been made in some cases. There is a desperate need to advance the work begun by Tom Collins with regard to workload at third level, and we note the OECD initiative that has been brought forward. We will engage. We must stress, however, the absolute need to negotiate with TUI. No report from no matter how exalted a body will be allowed to make inroads into our terms and conditions or damage our interests. We welcome movement, but we will not be bypassed. And there are very key elements that are being discussed there, as you well know, including the career structure and issues that will impinge upon organisation design and many other matters that will have a significant impact on members. To be clear, we want a unified third level strategy that delivers a coherent and cohesive sector. And much of what you said seems to be supportive of this view, and we will hope to progress this view in the weeks and months ahead. And time is pressing in this regard as new TUs come forward. And we fully agree with you on the need for negotiation of new academic posts or roles in the National Negotiation Forum. One point that we would stress is that what is currently proposed with regard to amending the HEA legislation does fall foul of the May 2017 agreement, which underpins our participation in the TU process. There are elements of what is now proposed which would overturn what was agreed with regard to governance structures. And it's worth saying those governance structures, they had much discussion, and a lot of the purpose of them was to protect regional interests within these new institutions. And it's a very delicate matter to come upon an agreement reached in such difficult circumstances only 4 years ago. We would not like to see anything that damages that agreement. It's worth mentioning as well that in MTU, there is a breach in what was agreed in May 2017 with regard to representation on the first governing body. And we suggested as TUI what we felt would have at least offered a certain ad hoc approach to meet some of the concerns, but we were disappointed with the response. And we want that matter to be addressed, and we want it to be addressed not only in MTU, but for the future TUs as they come on board. Because there are difficulties in the 2 TUs that already exist. There is that issue in MTU and others, and there are also planned ballots for industrial action across TU Dublin because of poor consultation, overzealous moves to implementation before the necessary negotiation. That can lead to unnecessary problems, and ironically enough, it can lead to delays. We'd also point to the need for a ballot, I should say an agreement, but maybe it'll become a further ballot, an agreement with regard to online lecturing and the massive workload implications that go with that. One thing that I think is not limited to any particular sector, but which we find frustrating and which you may be able to help us with, is what you might call a sort of managerial work to rule, an approach of finding the absolute minimum that a management can do in order to tick a box with regard to consultation or with regard to implementation of an agreement. Sometimes, indeed, that minimalism is hard to bear, but it goes further in terms of not even going to the minimum, but breaching the agreement, and we've given some indication of that. An instance, I suppose, of astonishingly poor consultation, indeed no consultation in advance, has recently occurred in Mayo, as you know, with regard to the setting up of the new Mayo College of Further Education. And we are very disappointed with how that has been brought forward, and we will seek to resolve the deep concerns that have arisen for TUI members as a result. You mentioned the COVID-19 Steering Committee attended by our Deputy General Secretary, Annette Dolan, and it's very good to see union representation there. We need union representation in other forums as well, of course, and there are important bodies such as SOLAS on which we have long campaigned to have that necessary representation. For all the success of the COVID-19 Steering Committee, as you've pointed to, we do have less successful industrial relations forums, such as the ETB-IR Forum, the IoT-IR Forum, and the National Negotiation Forum, which rarely seem to actually solve anything. By contrast, we could look at things that we in TUI pushed to have formed, the further education and training stakeholders and the third level stakeholders, the POSITS Forum. TUI's position and approach was the same in these as in other forums, but astonishingly, from our point of view, agreement was reached on many vexed and difficult issues extremely quickly. Frankly, it was faster than a speeding bullet in IOR terms, while the other forums in which we are so often frustrated move more at the pace of continental drift, perhaps. I'd also point to a difficulty with employers refusing to jointly refer matters on, and we've recently seen instances of this in the Labour Court, which is certainly not helpful and does nothing to increase our sense of a genuine engagement from the employer side and a genuine effort to solve problems. Both in third level and in further education, we are deeply concerned that we may move into a very fractured environment. I've already mentioned for third level our desire for a cohesive sector. We're seeing difficulties for TUI, and we think they will become difficulties from the sector in the inability of TU Dublin and THEA to reach joint positions. We've seen similar difficulties with 16 ETBs operating 16 different paths, And we don't believe that that's healthy for what you want to do in your new department, and it's certainly not healthy for what we want to do either. We're fully supportive of what you've said with reference to the development of apprenticeship. We are the experts in this regard. Few bodies, possibly no other body, has such a breadth of experience and knowledge here. So we look forward to engaging with you, as you've indicated, in driving on what can be done to further develop that very important pathway for young people into employment and into their future lives. One thing I will say is, whatever is put in place and developed, we should try to make sure that it is robust and it's proofed against financial shocks, because we saw huge impacts, as you know, with the last financial crisis, and indeed something similar now with regard to I suppose, the vulnerability of an employer-led approach, a solely employer-led approach, and what can be done in that regard when things go wrong. You did mention the new pay agreement, building momentum, which it absolutely obliges me to mention equal pay for equal work, and the fact that we have across your department, as well as of course the Department of Education, we have grades who are disadvantaged, and many members who are earning less simply because they were appointed after 2011. We want to see that matter addressed, and frankly, the Building Momentum Agreement does not do that. So this is a matter that we will have to come back to. In terms of the research part of the title of your department, we do have particular concerns with regard to researchers, and what we want are proper terms and conditions, and we're fully aware that across the world, in fact, researchers seem to be among the most exploited workforces for whatever reason. What we would like to see is no exploitation, proper value given to those colleagues who are now in employment or future colleagues. What we would like to see is research and lecturing to go hand in hand in our third level sector. And what we would really like to see is the closest alignment possible in terms of terms and conditions and pay, so that it would be possible to move between the two seamlessly, which would be very valuable in terms of the uncertainty of securing research funding. It leads me on to just to conclude on the issue that, or the sector that you highlighted so forcefully, which is youth reach, because one of our fears with regard to researchers in third level is of ending up with two workforces side by side, doing almost the same thing, having a huge overlap, but with massive differences in terms of the value that they feel themselves to be in place, and their terms and conditions and their pay and everything else that goes with their employment. That is the situation that has developed, if you like, by accident in Youth Reach. We're trying to address it. We've had long-standing policy with regard to the recognition of teaching as really teaching, and we have brought forward a conversion process. You know, there is an engagement at the WRC trying to drive that onwards. And in these days when we do talk about mental health and well-being, I'm acutely conscious, having spoken to many of our members in Youth Reach, of the severe distress that they feel, precisely because they feel undervalued, and precisely because they need those matters to be addressed and an end to be brought to what they see as an inequality. In closing, Minister, I again want to thank you for addressing our Congress. I wish you the very best, and we in TUI look forward to working with you. I've already said, I hope your ministry, your time in it, as well as the department itself, are successful, because I think that's a success that will help us too. But as well as being partners, we know we will occasionally be adversaries, but always from our perspective with a view to the greater good, and with a view to securing not just decent terms and conditions for our members, but the best educational service that we can possibly provide. Thank you.